How often do you think about the Roman Empire? Likely nowhere near as much as the creator of Warlord Britannia, a first-person strategy game set in the mid-1st century AD Britain. You have been granted command of a Roman expedition to Britannia. Unfortunately, except for an understrength century, your legion exists solely on paper. As an untested legate, your only option is to conquer Britannia and use the spoils to expand your legion. Will you be able to survive the hordes of feral Britons? But first, a word from the developer. I contacted Darkmatter of Darkmatter Games to ask him a few questions about his intriguing first project. Those questions are on screen, and his responses were helpful and extensive. The origins of Warlord are surprisingly humble. It started in a series of tech demos and an instant action style game with capturable points and respawns. Inspirations were especially varied, and I wasn't expecting RimWorld to be among them, but in retrospect, it makes sense. Darkmatter was understandably nervous leading up to the release, especially considering the rather haphazard marketing strategy implemented, but Warlord's surprise success has managed to change his long-term plans and allow Darkmatter to make game development his profession. Though it shouldn't be that much of a surprise. When I saw a Remy Down Under video featuring the 1.0 version, I had to shell out a few clams for the game. I could see the potential that lay within and a dedicated developer willing to listen to community feedback. And I'm not joking, because this game has gone through 6 major updates since launch. Each update added new systems, units, and buildings with input from the community that grew around Warlord. As a result, the 7.0 version has a sequel's worth of content compared to the 1.0 release. This is a level of commitment to improving the product rivaling a AAA developer with a goodwill deficit and cash to burn. Praise Darkmatter. Now, visually, Warlord Britannia likely won't wow you, but the general aesthetic is pleasing to my eyes. My buddy described it as Roblox meets Total War, but gritty Playmobil feels apt too. I think Warlord's lighting, reflections, and volumetric clouds are some of its strongest visual aspects. Not to mention how slavish Darkmatter was with detailing unit models. Just about everything you will see is period accurate for Roman legionaries and the native Britons. The island itself is almost like a character with how it changes the farther north you go. Lush forests of the south give way to rolling hills, which in turn become near desolate plains in the far north. Now, I do need to give a warning about Warlord's performance, specifically in the endgame. No matter how much I fiddled with the settings, I was unable to get the game to run at a stable frame rate. I couldn't get Warlord to run past 55 FPS with an 11700K and a 3070 Ti at the minimum settings with as few entities loaded in as possible. Typical endgame gameplay was in the mid to high 20s. Major battles would become slideshows between 5 and 9 frames per second. Performance was a topic of discussion between Darkmatter and I. According to him, performance issues are due in part to engine limitations inherent to Unity. Every unit calculates navigation paths, and more units means this takes longer to complete. It basically became a matter of choosing between speed or FPS and trying to find a balance. Especially considering Warlord is an open world game where the interactions exponentially increase as the player continues. While I'm on the topic, there are a few bugs to be found. Most of them are minor annoyances rather than anything game breaking. My personal favorite so far is the traveling bow on the pause screen. From a sound standpoint, Warlord's fine. I enjoyed the soundtrack composed by Joshua Lamberti, even if I heard the battle themes more often than anything else. One minor nitpick that I have is in regards to the sound mixing. It's inconsistent. For the longest time, I thought my horse did not have any kind of traversal sound until I heard it buried in the mix. This is mostly due to the fact that the sounds of clanking metal are quite loud in comparison. Thankfully, there were no sounds in Warlord offensive to my ears, so I have no real complaints with the sound. Besides, with Warlord, the presentation is secondary to the gameplay for me. Leading a legion is something I've done in many strategy games, but almost never from the perspective on the ground. That novelty alone carries Warlord very far, and the execution brings it home. Forming up several centuries with artillery support to establish control over a village never gets old. Neither does joining the fray yourself. But it'll take some time to get to that point. First, you need to establish a camp. This involves setting up tents, storage areas, and constructing basic defenses. But then you'll need to figure out logistics. Your soldiers need food, supplies, and pay every day. The only means to acquire these goods is the local populace. Capture settlements to enslave and exploit the inhabitants. Or you can simply raid military and civilian convoys. I did that a lot to supplement my income. But you'll have to be careful. Ticking off the natives enough will cause them to send raiding parties at your camps. They may even prepare ambushes for when you are gallivanting around the countryside. Not to mention the numerous warbands that patrol between key settlements. And it's all fun and games until the warband loads in. As your legion grows, so does its needs and your need for specialized troops. Legionnaires are the basic unit and cheap to replace. I find them more useful in my main army than languishing in outposts. These are camps that you can set up around the island to guard choke points or settlements. I often use them to boost production in towns across the island. Thus, auxiliaries recruited from Gaul man these outposts. Auxiliaries are more expensive to recruit, making them more apt for garrison work. Though I will say they can hold their own in a fight. But winning a fight will take more than some soldiers in the field. Superior firepower goes a long way. Archers are Thracian in nature, and a single full-strength cohort can whittle down battle lines. Probably why I only get 2. 4 cohorts, and I guarantee this island would be mine in a week. Artillery requires engineers to construct and maintain. At full strength, the Legion will have 6 Scorpions and 2 Ballista, weapons that the natives cannot possibly hope to match. I found them to be very useful at protecting my camp. Turning the flammable ammunition on was a favorite of mine. I like big booms and I cannot lie. Of course, sometimes you'll need a force that can chase down fleeing foes or outflank formations. Thus enters the Equus and the Cohorts Amicorum. The Equus are usually legionnaires on horses. During this time period, the Equites were military officers rather than an organized fighting force like in the days of the early Republic. Those rich and powerful Romans who could afford a horse were usually part of the Cohort Amicorum instead. Literally a cohort of friends, these were career soldiers like the Praefectus Castorum and political appointees like the Tribunes. A combination of trusted advisors and opportunistic patricians. With all these troops, you'll need to learn to put them into formations appropriate to the situation. These formations have variations as well to better reflect your force composition and battlefield conditions. Though occasionally you'll have random convoys plowing into the back of your battle line. Nothing ever goes fully according to plan. On top of my praise, I do have a few criticisms with Warlord's gameplay. The menus in general could be easier to navigate and read. Moving legionnaires between centuries is a pain, never mind officers. I don't think the log needs to keep track of every single mission over the course of your campaign. That causes said log menu to freeze the game for a few seconds every time I open it. Warlord's progression plateaus in the mid-game. After establishing a foothold and carving out a colony, all that remains is the slow cleanup of the island. Some amount of additional variety would prevent it from feeling tedious. Mind you, I enjoyed nearly every second of my time, but I had almost completely filled out my legion by the time I had reached the Midlands. Quite frankly, the reason why I failed to do so sooner was because of my overly cautious method of play. I had avoided extracting more than a quarter of any settlement's food and supplies. I was trying to avoid raids in the early game. Only I had major supply issues and was living off caravans long after I should have stopped. But that's my own fault for being a moron. Despite my criticisms, I highly recommend Warlord Britannia as a unique strategy game that more people need to know about. It manages to meld real-time strategy and on-the-ground action in a way that compels me to play. Warlord Britannia is the only game in my Steam library where I have 100%ed the achievements. That is probably the greatest endorsement I can give. I wish Darkmatter the best in his future endeavors and eagerly await his next project. If Warlord looks up your alley, you can find it on Steam for about $20 normally or $15 on sale. Thanks for watching. More garbage to come.